Hi everyone, it's Professor Kettler. So this is the final video for your final milestone project. And this is where you're going to bring in all of the work that you've been doing over the semester to one final report. So I wanted to show you how the report should be laid out because you are not given like a document like you were with the other milestones. Instead, you're combining it all into one big paper. So the first thing that you need to do is make sure that you lay out the sections correctly. So you want to have, section 1 and label it with this in bold, and then you're going to have 2 subheadings underneath that. Then you will have section 2, and there will be 2 subheadings under that. Then you'll have section 3, and this will have 3 subheadings, which are the things that are underlined. Then you'll have section 4, and this will have 4 subheadings. And so I'm just going to kind of talk to you a little bit about what each of these subheadings should contain. I also have given you an example report in the class announcements that you can use as a guideline to help you as well. So the first subheading, environmental issue, this is where you're talking about your overall environmental issue that you picked and how it affects ecosystems and organisms on a global level. So how is this a global problem? How is water pollution a global problem? Climate change a global problem? Air pollution, invasive species, whatever you chose, this section is where you talk about how that problem affects ecosystems and organisms on a global level. The next section is your local community. So this is how you're talking about how the issue that you chose is going to affect your local community that you currently reside in. So, how is water pollution negatively impacting, your local community in Virginia? How is, air pollution negatively impacting your community in California? And you're going to want to include examples of these effects. So, recent examples of negative impacts, like for instance, one student I had did wildfires, and they talked about how climate change was causing an increase in wildfires to their community, and they posted about that here. In your next section, this is the ecological processes section. So you have section 2 and you have environmental issues, and then you're supposed to have, 2 more. I am highly recommending that you combine the human activities and local community sections because they're very similar. So in the first section, you're identifying all the ecological processes that are being affected by your issue. So remember, we talked about ecological processes are the water cycle, the nutrient cycles, community dynamics, and energy flow. And so you're just giving kind of a general, in this section, a general idea of how, your issue is affecting these ecological processes. It's pretty brief. And you just need to talk about, how are they being negatively impacted? So how is water pollution and air pollution impacting the water cycle? And, how would climate change be impacting the carbon cycle? And how do these then go on to affect the ecosystem's community dynamics and how the energy flows? Now, in the next section, the human activities and local community, I'm telling you to combine these because you're basically explaining how are human activities at the local level impacting the ecological processes that you talked about. So up here, if you talked about water cycle and community dynamics, down here, you're talking about how are human activities in your area impacting the water cycle and community dynamics. So you need some specific examples. So for instance, you could say, like for climate change, you could say, the humans in my community are burning a lot of fossil fuels, and therefore that's increasing, greenhouse gas emissions, and this is harming the carbon cycle and is also creating, problems with the community dynamics. And you're just explaining how, and you're giving examples of how. So, are certain species dying off more because of these impacts? And just make sure that it's relevant to your local area. So this top one is the general section, and this next section is how is activities on the local level impacting these ecological processes. Make sure you name the ecological processes. I've even had people kind of put them in bold just so that way they could see that they covered that topic. All right, next section. So this should be familiar from your week 5 milestone. If you did really well, you could probably just copy and paste in this section. However, make sure you identify the potential solutions and that they are valid ones from scientific facts and research that were done, and it's not just a personal opinion. It has to be shown that this is an actual solution that could work, and not just speculation. Then you're going to list the advantage and disadvantages for each of those solutions. Don't forget that economics most likely will play a large role in a solution, like how much does it cost, how is it going to impact people on an economic perspective. And then the last section, human behavior, is what are the multiple ways that human behavior would have to change in order for those solutions that you identified to be effective. All right, the last section, parts of it are from your week 4 activity. Other parts you're going to have to kind of update a little bit and tweak to make sure that it fits the requirements. So in the first section, you're identifying personal habits and daily activities. So this is where people miss things the most, miss points the most on this assignment, because you have to identify the personal habits and daily activities that affect your defined ecological processes. So you're going to have to go back up to section 2 and see which ecological processes that you identified and talk about how you are impacting them. So if you chose the water cycle and community dynamics, how are your habits impacting those processes? So how are you impacting the water cycle? How are your habits impacting community dynamics? In the daily life section, you're just talking about how are you contributing to the larger problem. So if you chose water pollution, how are you contributing to water pollution? If you chose climate change, how are you contributing to that? This is where you can put your statistics that you did in week 4. So like, how much water did you consume? How much electricity? Whatever it is that you chose, this is where those statistics go, is under that daily life subheading. After that, you're going to prioritize the habits that you talked about above and talk about which ones has the greatest impact on the environment to which has the least. So you're just kind of putting them in order of, which has the most negative impact. And that's the habits that you identified up here and in your daily life. And then the last section, you're going to go ahead and combine these two because they're very similar and it just makes sense to put them together. So in this very last section, you're going to talk about several ways you can alter your lifestyle habit and your activities to meet the guidelines that you talked about in your potential solution. So, how is the changes that you proposed going to meet the solutions that you mentioned in section 3? So how is changing your habits going to add to those solutions? So let's say you came up with the solution of, recycling. So how is your habit going to help with that solution? And you can see more ideas about how this is done in the example that I give you. So I'm going to go ahead and go there real quickly. And in here, so for your class announcement, I have an example right here of the final paper. You should click on this link and it will take you to a PDF document. And you can scroll through and you can see exactly how each of these sections is supposed to be filled out, examples of how it's done, so that way you can align your paper to the expectations of what you should do. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing because you can review it yourself. But if you have any questions or anything that you're concerned about, let me know and I can help you out.